good morning. Thank you very much for having me. I have 3 objectives in the following 30 minutes. First is that you don't hate me, because I'm the only obstacle between you and the lunch, and I'm hungry too. Thank you. Thank you, Emily, for just placing me exactly here. Second is that you just don't fall asleep, because I'm going to talk about this fascinating topic about AI regulation, and I'm sure that everybody was waiting for it. And third is about my personal experience, because in the last 5 years, I've been surrounded by the same mantra and the same narrative. You cannot regulate AI. You should not regulate AI because this is going to stifle innovation. We cannot regulate it because it's a fast-moving technology. You don't know what are the outcomes. And the next goal, therefore, is to convince you in the following 30 minutes not only that we can regulate AI, but we must. And why am I so sure? Because we have done it already in the past. Every single technology revolution has led into social revolution. And sometimes, and we can just focus on the technical revolution as of the 18th century, starting with the Industrial Revolution, it's a great example where regulators came too late. They came too late because they were not understanding the technology, they were not understanding impacts, and because of the pressure of the lobbies of the industry and the factory owners. You can, think about the big tech, they just were the joke compared with the lobby that the industry factory owners were pushing in the 18th century. The result is that they could not prevent the economic and social upheaval. And they ended up, of course, having a regulatory response that was late, but it was useful. Why? Because we had to cover the challenges of child labor and safe working conditions. And already in 1802, the UK Factory Acts, it was the first ever regulation limiting work hours for women and children and improving factory conditions. Then we had the first wave of telecommunications revolution in the 19th, 20th century with the telegraph, with the telephone, and the challenge was how do we regulate the need for standardization and monopoly control. And for example, then we have the US Communications Act in 1934, and the first ever international governance institution, which is ITU, International Telecommunications Unit, which is already working under the umbrella of the United Nations, and that was in 1865, and was the first ever organization for international standardization. But we can follow with the automobile revolution in the 20th century, where there the topic was about safety and environmental. And regulation allowed for the National Traffic and Safety Act in 1966, and the first Clear Air Act on 1970 that was regulating the emissions. Last but not least, we are facing these 21st century channels on the second wave of telecommunications revolutions with 3G to 5G networks, broadband, satellite communications, and need to regulate fair competition, infrastructure development, and data security. An example is the 5G security toolbox, regulating cybersecurity in 5G networks, but also the internet and digital revolution pose a problem on digital platforms, control, monopoly, internet neutrality, and accountability. And we can have examples of the Digital Services Act and Digital Market Act in 2022. So what would make AI different? AI is much more complex indeed, because we need to take into account all these topics at the same time. We need to protect cyber rights, environmental, infrastructure control, monopolies, safety, but we can do it. What it is true that AI has some particular characteristics that any other technology before has had. First of all, its ubiquity. It affects absolutely all the sectors of activity, all the industry. Second, it not only affects production and economic means, it also affects society. The lack of integrity of information, misinformation, disinformation is affecting human relations and social beliefs, lead to, we have seen it, polarization and confrontation of society. It affects fundamental rights. Third characteristic is that almost all the applications of AI can be of dual use. And the fourth, not less important, is that it can continue to evolve without human agency. And this is why, even though we have spent the whole morning talking about trustful AI, and I'm sure the technology will come, trustfulness doesn't mean ethics. And there's a clear differentiation between responsible AI, which is, of course, approaching all these important topics like governance, explainability, fairness, privacy, security, transparency, but it doesn't mean that the trustworthy AI is ethics. So this is few examples of we can have trustworthy technology, like for example the facial recognition, but not necessarily this provides to an ethical use. That can be mass surveillance, that can target marginalized or vulnerable groups. The concern doesn't lie on the technology itself. The problem is not the technology, it's the use of the technology. Another example is predicting policing algorithms. It's of course, an equal treatment under the law is the most important ethical concern. Even a very innocent technology like target advertising algorithms can have an ethical use if you're targeting, for example, people who are addicted to drinking and you're just making target advertisements of drinks, or if you are a person that has a ludopathy and you're targeting him with casino and gambling ads. So really, what we cannot ensure it is just with the technical use of technology, we can prevent unethical uses of it. Why? Because this is not a technical problem. This is a techno-social problem. And this is why before I just trying to put the difference between trustworthiness and ethics, but I want also to share the difference between ethics, governance, and regulation, because we mix them there all the time. What is ethics? Ethics means a set of principles and values, and I'm supposed to act ethically when according to those principles and values, either because I'm a company, or because I'm a government, a user, somebody who implements technology. But that is absolutely subjective, because principles and values change from societies to societies. Codes of conduct, nice to have, but they do not generate any accountability. Governance is the important thing. Governance means what are the instruments I must put in place to ensure that companies, governments, users are going to behave ethically. And that generates accountability, and that generates rights. And regulation is one of these instruments, but it's not the only one. We can achieve governance through regulation, through market incentives, through transparency tools, through oversight boards, and that's what we should focus on. Of course, regulation is very, very useful. And we can cope with different levels of regulation at the same time. Here you have the Charter of Digital Rights that I led during my role as a state secretary. Then we have like international common agreements, like the G7 Hiroshima guidelines, ethical guidelines for generative AI. The 1 year ago already executive order by the Harris administration that, of course, the next Trump administration has already vocally said that they are not going to support anymore. And the famous European AI Act, I'm here after 27 hours without sleeping, and after 7 hours discussion about how to regulate or not regulate large language models. But we ended up of a very landmark regulation that is one act for 27 countries. Sometimes we talk about regulation as a way to hamper or stifle innovation. That's not true. The problem why Europe has not been leading the digital market is because we don't have a single digital market, because we haven't had the huge amounts of investment necessary, but above all, not because of regulation, but because of regulative fragmentation. And we have learned from the past. We have learned having 27 different national laws and having now one for the 27 countries, which I see is the other way around in the United States, because there is no federal law. There is every single law in every state, that the California Act that was vetoed just less than 1 month ago, and we can have like an heterogeneity of legislation, which is what the industry expects, having such a mess that they don't have to comply. So in order to make a small deep dive on what the EU AI Act is, just very, very short. There is a narrative that the AI Act is regulating AI. It is not. So the first thing, the AI Act is not regulating AI. It's just regulating the high-risk use cases of AI. So it's a product-based, matrix-based regulation, where there are these 5 levels. Of number 1 for me is the most important one, which is this is the landmark of this regulation. This is not a technical standard. This is not a legal standard. This is a moral standard. Why? Because it's the first time ever we're telling the world what we do not want AI to do. So the prohibited uses, for me, is the most important part of this regulation. We're telling that even though something is technically feasible, we don't want this to happen in Europe. What are these prohibited uses? 1, social scoring. We have that in China. No problem for them. We don't want that to happen in Europe. 2nd, massive surveillance by governments. 3rd, biometric categorization. 4, any influence of technology, neurotechnologies on human will and manipulation. So all these things, we can put them in a law. Why? When you were talking, Professor Goldwasser, about the existential risk of AI, that the AI safety institutes that I know well are putting the threat on human existence. No, that is not the threat. The threat is not that an Armageddon-like robot comes here and kills us all. The real threat is that we all become insane. That's a real existential risk. Because seeing is believing, we cannot see that anymore. And the existential risk is we cannot believe what we see, we cannot believe what we listen to, what we cannot believe what we read. And one of the important incorporations of the EU AI Act is the obligation to mark where something has been generated by AI. Of course, probably I don't care. If I receive a newsletter or a newspaper that is 100% elaborated by AI, probably I'm very fine because it's absolutely fit for use, and it's also personalized for me. But I must know. I must know if that videotape corresponds with the reality or not. And this is so simple that it's like unbearable that we are not demanding this as a right as citizens. Because this law is not only regulating the corporations. Above all, it's thought to regulate the use of governments and public bodies, supposedly even authoritative regimes, in the use of AI. The other are more technical things. So what is a high-risk use case of AI? So anything that affects safety, health, or fundamental rights in what we call high-risk domains. And one of the challenges of the regulations is to make it future-proof. And this is why all these high-risk domains we're putting not in the law, graved in stone, but in an addenda, where it can be automatized, that can be updated. So we are considering the same regulation, the updating mechanisms. So something can be a risk today and cannot be a risk tomorrow. And eventually, technology will find an answer. We all know that technology is developed to solve problem A, but sometimes in solving problem A, you generated 100 new problems where you don't have the solution yet. And the solution will eventually come, but what do we do in between? That's why we need some certain margins of security. For that, what we have is what we call a conformity assessment, which is like a quality procedure. The other important thing is that this law, it does not affect R&D, therefore it doesn't affect innovation. It doesn't apply to academia and R&D. It doesn't apply to the pre-training of the models. It doesn't apply to open source below a certain threshold, which is 10 to 5 flops. Why? Because we want to encourage also a more sustainable use of energy. We'll talk about this later. And this is not graven in stone just by the regulators. It's something that is being developed together with the industry in what's so-called codes of practice. Okay? The question of the AI Act didn't come from the high-risk use cases of AI. It came when in between the negotiation, the ChatGPT moment arrived. And all of a sudden we had to think, should we consider large language models or general purpose models and systems that is written in the law as high-risk use cases by default? What happens? Are they minimum risk? And what we decided is that we cannot know if large language models will end up in a high-risk application or not. But that doesn't mean that we don't need to have some transparency on how these models are built. And this is what we are asking, not a regulation, but transparency on those models. The question is why everybody was so angry of that, why I personally received so much pressure from the lobbies not to demand transparency. Question is, what do you have to hide? We'll come to that. So, of course, I could just outbrief the most important challenges between them. I would hear the three important ones, which are the Biden-Harris Executive Order, the European AI Act, China AI Regulation, and the UAE. But basically, we don't have time to go through this, is one thing on the executive order is based on code of conduct and voluntary commitment. We have the same issues around transparency and safety. We are an enforced, as I mentioned, act applying to 27 member states. The China regulation is much more better than the US and the AI, for example, in things like protection of children. We have no control of protection of children in the European Union. The Chinese have, of course, they have much focus on security and governmental control. And the EU is very friendly. It's a very friendly regulation. It's more based on code of conduct and voluntary commitments. Okay, I want us to highlight that regardless we don't have at the United States a federal law There are many, many vertical laws. So it's not that in the United States you don't have regulations of AI. You have a lot of regulations on AI, but they are vertical. And of course, in the last administration, there was an important task of the Executive Office of the President. They were very active. Then you have the Secretary of Commerce, and their regulations are regarding health and medical services. While in the EU, because we already have also this regulation, we have focused on the governmental and the technology and the science and how can we regulate the market. The important conclusion here is that whatever happens in the regulation of the world, we have three predominant regulatory strategies. Either you have overhauls, that means that using existing regulation and update it with AI particular risks. Second, novel AI regulations, which are specific for applications, or the omnibus regulation that the EU AI, which is general in purpose, that not sector specific. But with all that we have now, there's a new I would say, way of regulating, which is asking for these AI transparency mandates. And all the different approaches in the world are common in these requirements. First of all, we need to ask for human in the loop requirements that mandate human oversight in anything doing about AI, assessment, evaluating systemic risks ex ante, audits, evaluating ex post assessment and impacts, disclosure, usually about the model definition and design, the parameters, the usage, and inventories of use cases and training data, and red teaming as a novel mechanism for adversarial testing on AI vulnerabilities, very similar to the cybersecurity ones. Okay, so with all that I've shared, is that enough? All these national approaches, regulation? No. Not even enough, not even close. This is the question that Secretary General Antonio Guterres made himself 1 year ago, in October 2023. He said, okay, when we discovered the atomic energy, we launched the International Agency for Atomic Energy. Do we need an international agency for AI? Because this seems to be as challenging as the atomic energy. So what he decided is to launch an advisory body that I happen to be honored to be selected and be one of the two co-chairs together with the president of Google, James Manica, and as you see here in the first row, second place, His Excellency Omar Sultan Al Omaya, who is the Minister of Digitalization and AI here in the UAE, is a member of my board. So these 39 members have been working for 1 year trying to answer that question. Do we need to regulate AI globally? Why? What? How? And why the UN? So we are, very diverse team. What we have done in the last year was an in-depth analysis for many months. We had we issued an interim report back in December, and last September in the UN General Assembly meeting, we not only presented the final report with the final recommendations I'm going to share with you today, but we managed to have 2 UN resolutions, one led by the US, another led by China, and the final adoption in the Global Digital Compact of these recommendations that have been incorporated in the Pact of the Future. That means that we do have a mandate to put all these recommendations in place. So already in the interim report, we already witnessed the need that there was a global deficit of AI. Even though there are a lot of international events, international conferences, international meetings, you see how this changed as of ChatGPT release. It was like 2 or 0 per year, all of a sudden 6 per year, and 7 in the first half of 2024. We say, we don't need more conferences. We don't need more conversation. We need to align those conversations. We need to get synergies and commitments from it. But the funny thing is, even though we have all these international conversations, only 7 countries in the world, the G7, is party of all of them. And there are 118 countries in the world that are party of none. So it's not that there is no inclusivity on the participation of the development of these technologies, nor in the participation of the benefits. They are not even in the discussion. So there's a lack of inclusiveness at the global level. a very important example, for example, very capable, like the United Arab Emirates, which is ranking 27 in the Tortoise Index of the top 40 countries with technology capabilities in AI, is not even in 2 of these conferences. So the lack of participation at the global level is huge. So what we need is really a reliable and inclusive approach to global AI. This has whole humanity implications. We need to have information flows, knowledge pooling, and cross-border collaboration, and networking together the existing organizations and initiatives. So one was the challenge, we need to have a more inclusive global governance of AI. Second is the deficit in the implementations. Look at how many AI standards we have already, either by ITU, by ISO. This cannot be, again, a battle for standards. We need standards interoperability. But also the deficit in implementation, because we already have all these agencies working on something about AI. The first opposition about a global AI governance instrument was from within the United Nations. Say, why do I need another office or whatever if I already WHO, I already have WIPO, I have UNESCO. And this is good that they are there because they have the vertical domain. Who better than the WHO Health Organization to know about the impacts of AI in medicine diagnostic and medicine devices, or the WIPO approaching the challenges on intellectual property. But this is not enough, because what we need is exactly horizontal, holistic, transversal view, because this is a general purpose technology. So if we only regulate it at application level and use, we cannot do it well. And we cannot govern also at the level of the impact alone, waiting until the impact is here, because that would be too late. We cannot just kick the can down like in the climate change issues, because we cannot wait another generation to see the harm, or we are not going to revert back the harm we've done. So also because it has society-wide impacts, like for example, in multiple areas of group like society, future of work, environment groups, we need these transversal governance tools. And the other, which is very important, is the deficit in transparency. Deficit in transparency, therefore deficit in accountability. Why? Because this is in the hands of very, very few powers and very, very few companies. And because that's, and make it so different between these technologies and any others, this has not been developed in the academia. You guys have not developed this. This has been developed in the research centers of private company. Why? Because you didn't have the talent? No. Because you didn't have the funding? No. Because you didn't have the data. And the only reason why this technology has been developed in the private departments of the companies is because they had the data. The AI monopolies are built on the data monopolies. And now there's a competition for having access to computing power. So this is a concentration of power. And because this has not been developed by the academia, they don't have the obligation to publish. They have not been transparent at all. And we have no clue about what's in the black box. We don't know the risks, and we either don't know the opportunities. And that's why, about all these recommendations, that is the summary recommendations, we need to have a common understanding. If we don't understand what's going on, we cannot be able to understand the opportunities and the risks. Just one thing, and with the example. For me, one of the most interesting, or I would say valuable philanthropic actions that has occurred the last year has been the release of AlphaFold. AlphaFold, as you know, developed by DeepMind, Nobel Prize of Chemistry. Of course, this is a very philanthropic activity. It costed millions of dollars, but don't be naive. They are releasing version 3, and they already have version 5, building an absolute vertical on pharmaceutical and drug discovery. So based on the data platform monopoly, we are building the AI monopolies, and based on the AI monopolies, we can build the monopolies in any sector. They can be the leaders in healthcare, they can be the leaders of energy, they can be the leaders of anything. So what we are asking here is 7 new instruments. We are not advocating for an AI agency. Why? It's costly, it's bureaucratic, it's vertical focus. We need something to coordinate the existing initiatives. Scientific panel, that's the most important one in this audience. I will talk about this. An AI policy dialogue, an exchange, a standard exchange, and then 2 important initiatives, a capacity building network, and an AI Global Fund that will allow to create new ecosystems for entrepreneurs with a triad of data, talent, and compute. Because that's what we need to generate new ecosystems for innovators in the Global South. Remember that everything we know about AI has just been trained with data, first-party data of the global north, talent for the global north, and computing capacity in the global north. And up to date, OpenAI has 300 data centers that only can provide the energy for 10% of the English-speaking language community. So this is not sustainable. If we need to engage the global south in the opportunities of AI, if we want equality on the benefits, we need to ensure equality on the access to data, computer, and talent. And that's something you will love, Professor Simon. There is no single hypercomputer, hyper-performance computer in the world, out of the 110 hypercomputers in the world, in the global south. Not a single one. In Latin America, in Africa, on some periods of Southeast. So that's what we need, a global fund for AI, not only to create these ecosystems, but also for the application of AI in sustainable development goals. Because the only reason why we're doing this and putting so much money in this industry is because it has its benefits. And I'm absolutely convinced of those benefits. Benefits in terms of accessing education, public health, advance in research, what we have seen dramatically increasing in the last year. And of course, in the achievement on SDGs, only 20% of the 2030 goals is achieved today. So probably with a little help of AI, we can do it better just with only the human intelligence. Just let me focus on this. This, as I told you, it is a mandate. This mandate means that now the UN process is in the building this. It has been a working team, led precisely by Spain and Costa Rica, that they have the commitment to put in place this scientific panel in less than 1 year. So we're going to work and set up this scientific panel, very similar to ICC panel on climate change, but with much more agility. We don't expect one report every 6 years. We expect one report every 6 months. That's how technology is. We want transparency on the risk, and we want transparency also on the opportunities. Just let me dedicate some minutes on the question of transparency. There was 3 big deficits: deficit on inclusiveness, deficit on implementation, deficit in transparency. And all the lobbies in the world have tried to prevent us to ask for transparency. That's a good example. When you ask for transparency, this is the fundamental model transparency index developed by High Institute in Stanford, Human AI Institute. They took the example of the EU AI. We had like 20 parameters. They invented a model with 35 requirements for transparency. These are the most important ones, the 12 ones. And they told all these big techs, just pick up the ones you want to report and the ones you don't want to report. So it's very significant what is the ones they have picked up. As you see here, the green ones, they're very easy. Just be transparent on model basics, model access, capability. What are they not reporting? Data. 34%. Look at OpenAI, 0%. Look at Amazon, 0%. Just OpenAI, 20%. Gemini, I don't know. Yes, Gemini was 0%. So nobody wants to disclose the data you're using for training. They don't want to disclose if the data, for example, is under copyright infringement. Another thing that EU AI Act is proposing is that you can declare the data you have under copyright, and the authors can prevent you from doing that in the training. That's called the right to opt out. And it is important that we see that the most transparent one, no surprise, are the open source models. And the second one is the one by Aleph Alpha, which is a European model. So I think that shows what is the game. What do you need to have? And therefore, that's what we need. These examples, which I say sometimes we do in the regulation what the US is doing through reputation, I think at the end of the day, whatever works. We want to know what's inside the black box. Why? Because otherwise nobody will adopt it. And we want all the industries to adopt it. So I'm really believing that when you put order in the market, when you give trust to the consumer and trust to the citizens, people can adopt it massively. So I would never take a pill that has not gone through FDA approval or the European agency approval. That happens with these large language models. Do you really expect that a serious industry like the car industry or the defense industry or any other industry in the world will use a black box? Besides, when all these models cannot evolve without private data, because they have all been fed with the general purpose open data. Okay, what are the challenges ahead? We're talking about an expectation acceleration of development of adoption, but also a high perception of risks. And we performed during this work on the UN with a risk pulse analysis and what are the perceived risks of AI in the near future. And the concerns are very, very important and multiple at once. Number one, damage to information integrity, so misinformation, impersonalization, intentional use of AI in conflict and armed conflicts, inequalities, malicious use, discrimination, international use. So really the technology sector is very, very focused on the unintended misuse of technology. But there is intended misuses also by bad actors. That's why we can only rely on the goodwill, okay? But important is the differences in perception of those risks. So in orange and yellow, you have Africa and Latin America. And you see that the most important concerns are use of AI in armed conflicts, discrimination, human rights violation, and very significantly on the Latin America, on harm on labor, destruction of jobs. So this is the perceived concerns on the global south. But what is the perceived risk by the experts? And that's very interesting. Of course, the experts, we are technology lovers. We don't see the problems as the rest of the world sees them. But there are two particular areas when the technology developers are very conscious. They are performing bad. And one, of course, is the risk of control on, this power shift and ownership of the technologies in very few hands. But the most important one also is on the environmental harms. And that is the second and last challenge. This is the expected level of consumption of energy worldwide. And already, the energy demanded by the AI systems, basically from the data centers, accounts already, the projections, 2-3% of the global energy consumption. This is not sustainable at all, because this is just energy consumption. What about CO2 emissions? What about water consumption? And that is going to pose a lot of challenges also at the social level. We know already that there are some countries in the world that don't want to have data centers because you're giving the power to this big tech to negotiate the power of electricity. So there comes this big four to Europe and they put 100 more data centers. They are the number one client for these electricity companies. And they can say, okay, the average price of energy in Europe will be 8. I know it's 10 in Germany, 5 in Spain. Let's agree on average cost of 8. That means that you're increasing the cost of energy in Spain for the rest of the industries from 5 to 8. So now the battle for AI is not the battle for the data, it's the battle for the control of energy. Because the models cannot grow, the models cannot perform better, because all the data has already been ingested. So it's a question of just brute force. The one that has more GPUs from NVIDIA latest version is the one that wins. And unless we develop alternatives to it, which is models that consume less energy. There's a lot of them for that. The other thing is the AI policy will lead to an energy policy. We see that in the United States. This is the 3 Mile Island nuclear plant close to New York that has been reopened and given to Microsoft just to train their models. And we are witnessing a nuclear renaissance that we're going to witness now, and all these data centers will be powered probably with small reactors close to those factories. But that's very part of the story, and you see all the geopolitical implications of placing data centers, agreements with UAE, with Saudi Arabia, with Europe. Now the next big thing is data centers, but that is not sustainable, not only from the energy point of view, as I told you, from the water point of view. We're going to compete, the humans and the AI, for 1 liter of clean water. Will I give this clean water to a country, to a citizen, to Mexico, where they have the highest stress in centuries, or to cool off a data center? But the other important thing is CO2 emissions. This is the level of emissions. Look at this. This is an average car lifetime. So the most efficient models emit the same number of CO2 as at 4 cars during the whole lifetime. So we need to put limits to this. We need to put limits to emissions, and we need to make better models. But all this consumption of energy, water, CO2 emissions, this is only from the training phase. But the important part will come with the inference. So all this data centers are covering the energy in the training mode. The training mode is once per month or once per week. It's very intense, very short times. Really, the increase of energy demands will come from the inference part. It's all the world together doing 200 prompts at the same time, every minute. You know that every time we do a prompt, we use the same energy of charging the whole iPhone the whole night. That's what we consume every time we make a prompt. So because this is not sustainable, the challenge is, can we make better green algorithms? Can we improve that? There must be market incentives for that, because the current industry and all the amounts of money that being powered by the VCs on this value chain is optimized only for the transformers architecture. That, as you know, from the seminal paper, attention is all you need, is not the most efficient energy consumption tool. And there are alternatives now. You know, Joshua Benchio from Toronto, Luis. So I think with MIT, you have this Hiena alternative. We have the Linux Foundation. I really would encourage to see more initiatives from that. We need to have much better algorithms, more sustainable algorithms that require less emissions of carbon and, of course, less consumption of energy and water. And last but not least, why do I put this picture? To remind you that this is not inevitable. The only inevitable thing in life are the forces of nature. We cannot prevent the sun to shine. We cannot prevent the stars to appear every night. But anything that we're discussing here is inevitable. It depends on us, because this is a result of our own construct as human beings. And we need to put the thing, and I think the important thing is what will make us human. What is the end of technology? Do we are going to put human on the loop? We're going to keep human agency. We can delegate in technology, but we cannot abdicate on technology. And I think we are on time to put the right guardrails, the right safeguards to really make this work for humanity. What ChatGPT is teaching us is that the important things are not the answers, are the questions. And when a society finds questions to existing, when a society finds answers to existing questions, that's called evolution. But when a society dares to make new questions, that's called revolution. Thank you very much.